All right, this is week 3. The finish line is in sight, so let's just jump in. We were at point number 8 last week of creating, this is basic practices for creating a discipleship culture in the local church. And point number 8 was emphasize gospel-based motivations for holiness. So as you're thinking about discipleship, we want to think about how is it that we are encouraging people to make progress in their lives and to pursue Christ, to live in obedience to Christ. One of the things we want to keep in mind is that there are good types of motivations for spiritual progress and there are poor types of motivation for spiritual progress. And so when we're helping people make progress in their lives spiritually, helping one another do that, we want to emphasize motivations that are rooted in the gospel. So all the time when we're talking about why we do things, we have to think about what has the gospel done in our lives? What does it furnish in our lives that give us the proper kinds of motivations for pursuing the activities that are involved in living life as a Christian? So the truth is we're not just helping people become more disciplined or helping them make moral decisions, although those things can be good and fruitful and helpful and important. We want them to experience all the fruits that the gospel of Jesus Christ makes available to them through the union we have with Christ. So in the gospel, we are connected to Christ by faith, and that connection is not just a theoretical connection. It's a relational and real and organic spiritual connection. We've been given the Spirit of God, and so the Spirit of God is working to bring the fruits of the gospel to bear on our lives so that we mature in ways that are shaped like Christ. So that's what we want to think about then. So for example, the gospel motivates us to confess sin. Now, we may be talking about the rhythm or the practice of confessing sin to one another, living transparent and honest lives. We're going to actually talk about that as a sample discipleship session at the end. But the gospel motivates us to confess sin because the cross has removed shame, and we do not have to prove ourselves to be morally good, to be accepted by God. The gospel motivates us to confess sin, to discover ways that temptation has deceived us from delighting in God. Those are motivations that the gospel gives us for that. The gospel motivates us to forsake sin because we've been created in the image of God for better things. We discover that sin distorts our created gifts. These are all things that the gospel does to help us think about those areas clearly. The gospel motivates us to forsake sin because God's instruction leads us to more satisfying long-term fruit. We obey by faith in God's promises and wait on Him for satisfaction. The gospel motivates us to love other people even when it's difficult because we know that the victorious love of God for us has been given through Christ, though we were unworthy. So think about that motivation. When we think about wow, we're calling one another to sacrifice. Very quickly, if you hang around with people who are mainly bent on worldly wisdom, they're going to talk about, I've tried to be loving, I've tried to be gracious to this person. They've done X, Y, and Z. It's been X amount of time that I've done this. I need to just I need to just take care of myself. Well, that's not what God did for us in the gospel, is it? And so what we say in the gospel is, there's no time to give up pursuing reconciliation, to demonstrating love, to continuing to forgive. We love other people when it's difficult because we know the victorious love of God for us, though we were unworthy. The gospel motivates us to serve in ways that are sacrificial because we're co-laborers for a better kingdom and have nothing to truly lose in surrendering to God. And so when we know that, when we understand what the gospel has given us in Christ, we know I don't have anything to lose by sacrificing. Oh, they're not going to care. It's not really going to work. It's not going to be fruitful. That doesn't matter. We serve a kingdom where God already has determined that it will. Whether we see it, whether it's practical in the short term, and we see that practical fruit, it's actually working for us in the kingdom, a better reward. So the gospel motivates us to forgive others because we know God's mercy to be great towards us, greater than what's required from us in showing mercy to others. The gospel motivates us to persevere in trials because we know God's grace has given us hope of undeserved favor through Christ when we rightly deserved judgment. So trials are the worst we will ever know, but we've been saved from God's wrath toward our sin because of His mercy. See, all these things are gospel motivations for dealing with the challenges of life, and we want to deal with things through a gospel lens. Without the gospel, think about what's true about us without the gospel. When we don't have the gospel in view in discipling and encouraging one another, we will hide sin to protect our image, won't we? And so when we see that, we go, wait, when we see lots of a lack of transparency and a desire to hide sin and to cover sin, what we immediately know is the gospel isn't in view. Because the gospel removes shame. It tells us that we're loved entirely, no matter how broken we are. Right? So we want to see that a lack of gospel motivation and understanding will cause us to hide sin, to protect our image, to hide sin because we do not believe God offers something better. To minimize sin because we believe it's not really holding us back from God's purposes for us. You see, without the gospel, we're motivated to minimize sin because we feel the short-term fruit really will make us happy. It's really desirable. Without the gospel, we're motivated to obey God primarily because we want to feel loved by Him or fear His anger. Without the gospel, we love people only when they measure up to our expectations. So if you look in your life and you're interacting with one another and it seems like you only display love, affirmation, care, security when other people are living up to your expectations, you know that love is not motivated by the gospel. And so we want to listen for those kind of things in our conversations and help one another dwell in the gospel, be motivated by the gospel. Without the gospel, we're motivated to serve as long as it does not require too much and makes us feel good for serving. Right? So even when you're leading other people to serve, we create environments where it's just fun to serve. But the truth is there's a lot of things in life that are required of us, even in the kingdom of God, that are not delightful, they're not fun, they don't feel rewarding, but they're necessary and they're important. Without the gospel, we lack a motivation for that. Without the gospel, we're motivated to hold sin over others as a way of motivating them to treat us well, rather than forgiving and freeing them. Without the gospel, we're motivated to complain in trials that we deserve better because of our record of righteousness or how we've been doing or how we've been serving and what we've been doing to try to focus on God. And so all of this gives us a kind of a contrast between how the gospel motivates us and the sort of things that happen in our lives when we're not motivated out of the gospel. And so we want to have a keen sense of that because in discipleship, really what we're trying to do is to harvest the fruits of the gospel in our life and to work them out in practice. So we want to emphasize gospel-based motivations for holiness. Number 9, we want to ask good questions. So a basic practice of creating a good discipleship culture is learning to ask good questions of one another. You may not have noticed, or you may have noticed that some people are particularly good at engaging other people in conversation. They just seem to have a gift about connecting with people. And it's easy to assume when you see that there are just some people that are good at it and others who are not. Have you ever thought that way? Like, they just naturally have a gift of connecting with people. Some people are good at it and some people are not. Well, let me tell you what I've seen by observation. The motivation and desire to serve other people in discipling them and pursuing that over time will develop the skill set in you, no matter what you think your current disposition is, where you can learn to engage and connect with people. That's what's true. And many of the people that you see, they've spent a lot of time, they might have a God-given deep motivation for connecting and for helping people do that, but they've developed a skill set along the way that anybody can develop as they think through it. To whatever degree it's true that some people are more gifted at connecting, we can often learn from them and grow ourselves and become more skilled at connecting with people, about deepening relationships, about engaging others in significant ways. It's important for everyone to learn from those who are particularly strong. And one of the basic skills that impactful people possess is the ability to ask good questions. And we often think that the best and most important discipleship will come through me instructing and teaching other people. But we all have a lack of receptivity naturally to instruction. That is part of our inborn sin nature. We see ourselves as wiser And we think, I'm in the chair actually to instruct other people. I want to share with you what I know. You get a group of people together, most of the time they're going to share what they know rather than learn from one another. But the sort of wisest and most perceptive among them is going to actually begin to ask questions that allow other people to bring things to the surface that we wouldn't normally see. And so engagement happens very effectively along the lines of questions. It's a primary skill. Think about it. Questions are a great way to connect with people initially. Do you know that people love to talk about themselves? Like at the end of the day, we all love to be known and pursued. You know, the people that you most enjoy being around are the ones who seem to have a real interest in knowing more about you. It says something about your importance to them. It says something about your value to them. And when you learn to ask questions, you gain skills at communicating value to other people. So you might actually value people and don't ask questions, and the other people don't feel valued. So if you're not aware of that, being the person who is always communicating, always talking about themselves, even if in your heart you're like, man, I really value that person, they have no idea that you do. Because one of the ways they experience feeling valued is when you pursue them and begin to ask questions that help them bring to the surface. Now, it's a great way to initially connect. When you meet someone, make an effort immediately to find out basic things about them. Where are you originally from? Are you new to the area? What do you do for work? What types of churches have you been a part of in the past? Would you consider yourself a Christian? Just by having some basic curiosity, you can connect with people and find opportunities to minister to them. You know, as you meet new people in the church, I mean, some of those questions are really basic questions that you can ask. You might be like, oh, this is really simple. I do this already. But even just getting comfortable asking slightly more probing questions when you're connecting can really help. Having a question like the one I just mentioned, would you consider yourself a Christian? I've never had someone get offended. I do it all the time on Sunday mornings when I meet people and I'm talking with new people that have come to the church. Hey, would you consider yourself a Christian at this point? And people either say yes or I'm not sure. I don't know. I think maybe. And you find out a lot about where they're at. And nobody feels offended. You didn't have to dig in their lives. They told you their own self-perception of where they're at spiritually. And it allows you to go, okay, well, maybe God's given me this as a situation where I can speak into and make a connection. Just by having some basic curiosity, you can connect with people and find opportunities to minister to them. Number two, questions. Second thing, questions are important for getting past surface conversation. So beyond just those initial connections, now you have maybe friendships, relationships in your life group and other settings, in your home, in your workplace. You know, questions are very important for getting past surface conversation. Most of the time, left to ourselves, we talk about, the things that everyone jokes about, sort of weather, sports, basic events, right? We don't talk about ideas. Feels a little bit unsafe, but the truth is, if you're willing to just serve people, you can allow them to talk. You learn a lot about them. You ask questions, and it takes the conversation beyond the surface. So we ask questions for getting past surface conversation. Little side tip: if you want to be able to share the gospel with people, ask them 10 questions before you do any talking about the gospel. And before long, you'll find yourself with 10 decent questions in the middle of a conversation that you never guessed you would be having with them. And you can even think about how would I want to ask certain questions and make yourself just a good, gifted asker of questions. When you begin to meet together with somebody for discipleship, make it normal to ask sort of diagnostic questions to one another about your current spiritual condition. What ways have you been encouraged spiritually this week? I mean, that's not very hard, is it? Find out what's going on below the surface. What ways have you been encouraged? Are there areas where you felt strong temptation towards sin recently? So you're meeting together. Maybe you've met a couple times. Are there some areas where you're feeling particularly tempted? And, what are those areas? What have you read from God's Word this week? Are there responsibilities in your life that you feel you're neglecting or struggling to understand how to perform in? These are all things that push conversations from, hey, we're just, talking about surface to, hey, let's talk about life for real. And you want to be able to do this in a discipleship relationship. Any number of questions can help you deepen conversations and work to establish a regular set of questions. You should work to establish a regular set of questions that can help you stay focused on spiritual encouragement and help. In a moment, we're going to go over what is like a 10-session discipleship guide. It's got questions buried in there. But one of the suggestions that it makes along the way is you should, when you're meeting together with somebody for mutual encouragement, you should come up with a set of questions that are helpful for you particularly. That you just say, we're going to ask this of each other every week and learn to be honest about it. So it just becomes normal to move past surface to talking about things that matter. All right, so that's number 9. Learn to ask good questions. Lastly, number 10, persevere. So last basic practice is really sort of a quality of the soul, perseverance. The most important things we do in life require a great deal of diligence. Making an impact on the spiritual growth of other Christians around us and other people around us will not come without the cost of perseverance. The reality of spiritual ministry is that it is not always easy to see the progress or fruit. You know, one of the things that people often encourage pastors to do, or like seasoned pastors encourage younger pastors to do, is find a hobby where you build something or it changes like immediately, like landscaping, gardening, woodworking. One of the reasons is because when you're engaged regularly in spiritual ministry, you do a lot of work, but you don't really see what's happening. And so it's a very vague accomplishment. And so to scratch that little bit of itch, like you'd like to get something done every now and then, right? You can maybe build something or put things together or whatever it is. And it's something I've heard it dozens of times from seasoned pastors. Like just find something that when you do it, you can say, oh look, it's done and it looks nice, and feel a little bit of satisfaction that way. I say that by way of reminding you that the reason that people feel that that's a need is because ministry, the kind of thing that we're talking that everybody in the body really does, it takes perseverance. You don't always see the fruit quickly. You're not always sure that it is actually fruitful. But over time, you can see the impact. So the reality of spiritual ministry is that it's not always easy to see the progress. And for this reason, the appendix in your notes is there to remind you that we're not just working together at a task of discipling one another. We are joining the work of God to bring his people into maturity in Christ. And it's God's work. God is maturing us. This is us joining and multiplying the work that God has called us to. So take some time to study the appendix in your notes called Grace-Based Sanctification. It's just a bunch of passages and an insight from each of the passages about what it is that causes people to grow. In case you think it's all dependent on you, they're almost entirely dependent on God. And so these are just biblical passages that say God will grow his people. And so we can have confidence. That means when I'm struggling and thinking, oh man, it's this person, they just don't seem to be making progress in this area, I can trust that even when I'm not having conversations, the Holy Spirit's at work. If the Spirit dwells in that person, they're genuinely a follower of Christ with a genuine profession of faith. I don't wonder if they're going to grow. I just want to help them continue to stay on the path towards growth. God will get the work done. He may do it through some challenging circumstances or trials. He may do it through just merciful interaction of other people than me. And so all of those are good. We're working for the kingdom. I don't really care if it's got my thumbprint on it or somebody else's thumbprint on it. Ultimately, we want it to be God's hand. So take some time to meditate on that. So that's our 10 particular basic practices. I want to move quickly into 7 ideas for being purposeful in disciple multiplication at Pillar Church. So this is 7 ideas for being purposeful. So think about what we've done so far. We did biblical principles, right? We've out here in the underlying ideas. What do I need to understand from the Bible that will tell me that this is important and tell me a little bit about how I'm to pursue it and what I need to keep in mind? Those were the biblical principles. Last week and a little bit here this morning, we talked about basic practices, just things I need to gain some ability at or realize I need to develop in myself if I'm going to be successful in that. So now what we want to do is connect the dots with kind of the big picture of the corporate ministry of the church, the things that we've designed and purposed to do together corporately, and how you individually can walk within that setting to actually engage people in peer-to-peer discipleship. You tracking with me? So that's why we titled it Being Purposeful. These are some things that if you were struggling to see how it moves from theory to practice, we hope to give you ideas in this section. So 7 ideas for being purposeful and disciple multiplication at Pillar Church. Number 1, utilize your life group. That may start with get in a life group. But utilize your life group. Now, these aren't exhaustive. They're not the only ways to do it, but these are ways in our context that you can make these kind of connections. It's possible that you've seen yourself as a passive participant in your life group. We've got 8, 9 life group leaders in the church particularly, and so you may have seen yourself just kind of, I participate in a group or attend a group. You're involved in it, even participate in the discussion, but the majority of what happens is determined by someone else who's leading, facilitating what happens each week. Consider a different approach to participation in your life group. Your life group affords you the opportunity to become personally aware of the needs for encouragement and growth in the lives of those who are attending and participating with you. You may hear about a prayer request or pick up on an area of struggle in the life of one of the other group members. You may be introduced to those who are less mature or not even Christians. You should see this as a great opportunity for engagement and make a plan to help others grow. Life groups facilitate personal engagement so that peer-to-peer discipleship can be more readily accomplished. So if you say, what's the discipleship plan of Pillar Church? And somebody say, well, we've got our large group services and then we have life groups. That's where we do discipleship. Well, that's a second layer, right? But another layer is those things are only matter and are only going to be impactful to the degree that the individuals in them leverage the valuable opportunity they give for doing that. So that applies to life groups. It also applies to ongoing courses and things like BCF and self-confrontation and other things like that. I'm going to hit that in a spot down the way. But our life groups are specifically designed to try to facilitate these kind of relationships that we're talking about. And it's a great place to start. Somebody asked me recently, I've been thinking about this discipleship stuff. What do I do? I was like, well, do you know anybody in your life group? Have you listened to what's going on? Is there anybody in that group that you sense needs some encouragement and some strengthening right now in their faith? Well, go contact them. You're going to see them at the next life group time. Plan to meet with them and just get started. Just figure out how to help them. So utilize your life group. Number 2, invite a new member or attender to go through the Pillar Basics Grow Your Faith course. Now you might be like, what in the world is that, right? Okay, well, you got a sample page right back here. So one of the things we've been working on for the last, I don't have a sample page. Maybe I can get one from the bottom here. Thanks, Zach. So it's not hung on our website yet, but at the end of, by the end of this week, our sessions here will be, the video sessions will be on a page on our website with a PDF that has this 10-session booklet, essentially. We're eventually going to get it printed. But right now it's just 10 sort of 2 to 3 page PDF documents that you can use to meet together with somebody and just read the Bible, look at what it's teaching, ask important questions. And so what we're saying is we want to make it normal that for everyone in the church to have sat down and gone through those sessions with someone else. It's designed to help people grow in their ability to encourage one another and give a broad sense of what are some of the rhythms of the Christian life, things that we involve ourselves in that we commit to together that allow us to continue to grow. So this is going to be just like standard discipleship operating procedure. Like if you're like, man, I want to help somebody grow, I've got this 10-session booklet. I'm going to sit down with them. I'm going to walk through it. We're going to do the questions together. Interestingly, it's broken up into biblical principles, basic practices, and being purposeful because we want to be dealing with head, heart, and hand. We want to be thinking about, what is this doing in terms of intellectually shaping me to understand the Bible? How does it impact my heart? What can I do with this? What do I need to commit myself to participating in? And so that's what it is. It helps flesh out the life of a disciple in the context of Pillar Church and what we're trying to do together through the local church. So we're going to come back to that at the end and look at that thing, and I'm going to talk to you about ways you can use that with people. But the idea is I want all of us to go through it with somebody and make it very normal at Pillar Church. Then when new people come in to say, hey, one of the things that we've all done is sat down with somebody and gone through this together. If you haven't done that yet, I'd love to do that with you. So now we know that as people are coming in, we can connect with them. Well, so that's a way that you can be purposeful then. You think about invite a new member or attender to go through the Pillar Basics Grow Your Faith course. And so we're encouraging every member to spend time going through this course with another person. And our desire is to normalize peer-to-peer discipleship in the life of the church. We imagine a day when it's second nature for seasoned members at Pillar to connect with incoming people and go through the discipleship tool with them. We want the environment to make it easy to say to someone what I was just saying. One of the things that all of us at Pillar have done is that we've gone through this short course to help one another grow in our faith. I'd love to help you go through it if you haven't done it yet. Most people who have started to attend are going to say, wow, that'd be great. If everybody else has done it, I'd like to at least be up to speed on what's going on here and how we're thinking about these things. So you've probably noticed that becoming a member at Pillar includes also a public recognition and reception into our family during a Sunday gathering, that we do that. You may think, well, that's just for visibility and introducing that. It is partly we want to do that. But one of the reasons we do that is so that other members know who is coming into the body and feel a responsibility to connect with them and help them grow. Here are 2 reasons you should seek out new members in the future and go through the Grow Your Faith discipleship tool. First, it ensures that new members coming in have an example of discipleship engagement from other members. They see that example, and it allows us to help them identify areas for growth, be a part of shaping their walk with Christ, and we're helping them grow and find their way into the body by doing so. So we want to do that. But second, it prepares them with a pattern for engaging others. If they're already a growing Christian with a level of maturity, we just want to put in their hand then through that experience a pattern that they can then use with other people in their workplace, in their lives, in their family, in the context of the church as they meet new people that are coming in. So we set a pattern that's useful. The practical pattern we can provide for new believers and incoming members will cause us all to be more equipped to expand the impact of the gospel together with people who do not know Christ. But let's not forget, there are many regular attenders at Pillar who have not yet solidified their faith and are still seekers. So we have people that attend every week who are not Christians yet. And so this becomes a way to just sort of a long walk through the gospel with somebody, have many conversations. And in our context, it's not just particularly one conversation, is it, that usually brings someone from, I'm not a Christian to, I'm a Christian now. It's usually a number of conversations over time. And through this, we can paint a picture of what it looks like to walk with Christ. So get to know people around you. Ask God to use you in their lives to clearly understand, help them clearly understand the gospel and understand what it means to live as a Christian. So utilize your life group. Invite new members and attenders to go through the Pillar Basics Grow Your Faith course. Here's another one you may not have thought. This is another way you can be purposeful. Identify an area of strength in your life and offer to help others. Identify an area of strength in your life and offer to help others. The doors into discipleship relationships are truly endless when you're making yourself available to be used by God. Here are a few examples of how you can take areas of strength, experience, or expertise in your life and impact the spiritual growth of others. Number 1, marriage mentoring. There are often people in the church who desire marriage mentoring on a number of levels, not just when they're at sort of quote-unquote disaster level or it's really broken down, it's really difficult. You may not particularly feel equipped for that. I don't always feel particularly equipped for that. But along the spectrum are people who they feel like they need tune-up. They need somebody to help them continue to grow in their marriage. They'd love someone who's got a little bit more experience to coach them through some of the basics. We have especially a high number of young couples that participate in the church. If you become proficient using a few marriage mentoring tools, you would find an endless opportunity to impact couples and their marriages and their entire experience of life in Christ. And so things like we've used the family life. Somebody help me with the title of that, like a little 6-session thing. Anybody? I'm drawing a blank. We did it as a conference. Lawrence Mixon led the whole deal.
Weekend to Remember?
No, well, Weekend to Remember's away, but this is something that you can host right in the church. But anyway, it's a family life thing, 6 sessions. It's really helpful. It's on marriage. If you just became good at facilitating that, we could send 2 to 3 couples your way all the time. And you could do it 6 weeks and start over with another 6 weeks and maybe do it once or twice a year. You would find you'd have an endless number of people who you'd be able to then be engaging in developing their marriages, but also finding out more about their other parts of life. We need that, honestly, in the church. We need people who feel equipped to do that or would be willing to become equipped to do that, to do that sort of thing. Financial mentoring. We've used Financial Peace University to help dozens of individuals and families think through their finances in a healthier way. Right now, Alex is the only one really equipped to do it, right? And so, but everybody else here could fairly easily become equipped, can't they, Alex?
Yeah.
Alex dove in at a time when he had just gone through it. It's a very easy system to do. And sometimes we feel like we've got to have a mass of people. Alex has done it with 20. He's done it with 2. it doesn't really matter. And it creates a context where you have a real relationship with this person. You see into other areas of their life and ways that you can help them grow in their faith. It's not just about money. Right, Alex?
That's correct.
So, financial mentoring. We need an increased number of people who can provide good coaching. I actually met a guy recently who said the people in his workplace, he has the ability to make it happen, would go through a financial peace course if we sent somebody out there. Like, that's a huge opportunity. We need to take advantage of those kind of things. And so, yeah, we'll get together. So, parenting basics. So marriage mentoring, financial mentoring, parenting basics. We have to figure out skills for one stage of parenting just in time to move on to the next challenge, right? Isn't that kind of how it works? We were watching a toddler the other day, and I was like, hey, I know how to do this, I think. And I don't have a toddler anymore. All that whole skill set. There's some things that when you have gone through an intense time of having small children, even just in our experience, that's been true. The last 13 years of our life, we've always had a baby or toddler. And so for people who are in that stage, I think I can give them a sense of like calm and peace, like maybe some perspective about what's happening in their lives. And many of you can do that as well. I'm entering the years where I've got teenagers, right? And so, somebody who has wisdom about parenting teenagers, I'm going to sit down with a notebook, and just be like, yeah, you may not have gotten everything right, and you may feel that way. You may be like, I didn't get everything right. Well, tell me what you got wrong, and we'll just kind of sit that down and take notes. There's lots of people in the church who would be hungry for someone who just said, we're going to do 2 or 3 weeks of just like what we learned as parents. You could get together 2 or 3 other couples and do it together and say, let's invite 3 other couples, 4 other couples, parents, and just tell them what we learned. And we'll do it over like 3 weeks. Before long, you would have so many people wanting to do that you wouldn't be wondering, who could I engage in a discipleship relationship with? Right? So these are doorways. The BCF courses, taking our self-confrontation course and becoming trained with our peer counselors through the Biblical Counseling Foundation materials will offer great opportunities to make a discipleship impact. It will also raise our capacity to help others with even deeper, more difficult problems in their life. And so we already got people doing that, engaged on a daily basis with helping people grow in their faith through that particular tool. There are really endless categories. The possibilities in this category are really endless. I can remember like one you've never thought. Sometimes it's just life skills and areas of interest. Being a Christian in the workplace. How to read the Bible. Tips for sharing the gospel. How to start a small business. Like in Iceland, here's what was really interesting. In Iceland, we had a group of 4 people who were skilled in business do a business development seminar, and they had 30 people come out, 20 of which were from the community. Like, those are huge opportunities for connections and relationships. And we often think, I don't have the expertise. Nobody would want to do that. Well, I'm on Facebook a lot. I pay attention to what's going on in people's lives. I see regularly Christians that I know going to little business development seminars to get better at doing things. And I'm like, we got people in our church who know how to do that stuff. And we would be able to make it a connection point for helping people. All kind of these mentoring areas, skill sets. The point is, identify an area of strength in your life and offer to help others. Through that, you will find opportunities. Number 4, start with prayer. Perhaps this should have been further up the list. Maybe number 1, since it said start, right? Simply put, our ministry, both at Pillar and your individual ministry, will never outgrow your prayers. Our ministry will not outgrow our prayers. A little prayer generally leads to a little gospel influence. A lot of prayer leads to endless possibilities. Beyond the unseen effects of prayer, which are the main point, right? Like seeing what God can do that I may never witness because I'm praying. I'm thinking because we're praying as a church. Beyond that, there are even practical ways that it can be a doorway for you into the task of making disciples. First of all, in your individual interactions with other people at church, take the time to find out the ways that they need prayer. At different times in the past, I've seen Ryan Pugh praying with people over on the side of after the church service is over. I've seen other people in the congregation gathering up a few others to pray for a particular person, mainly because they ask what's going on and they're willing to pray during that time. That should be the norm, right? That should be a normal thing that happens at the church. As you're interacting with people, simply asking, hey, are there things in your life that I can be praying for? You can't do that for every member, but you can do it for some of them, right? You can do it for ones that look particularly burdened on a Sunday morning, and it's usually pretty easy to tell if you just are paying attention where that is. And so, beginning with prayer, regularly asking people, taking the time to find out the things to pray with, pray on the spot with them, look for needs for discipleship encouragement in their life. And once you've done that, it's an easy step toward regularly meeting for encouragement and discipleship. Sometimes they've shared something with you, you've prayed for them. Hey, I'd love to follow up with that this week and just see how you're doing. You've got a contact information, email, phone number I could have. I'd love to continue to pray for and encourage you. Now you're down the field, right, of what we've been talking about. And that's something anybody can do. Like, you don't even have to be very knowledgeable about the things we've been talking about so far, and you can do this. But further, in offering prayer after corporate worship, you can utilize the time the body is already together to connect with people who have prayer needs. Tim and Amanda have transitioned to King's Church. They'll be there Sunday mornings all the time, starting next Sunday. But they've been the ones that have most regularly, since Jack and Eileen have left, just offering to pray for people after the service. But that's an area where there are some members that could just really provide an important thing in the life of our church of praying after the services for people who need prayer. So that we could say at the end of every service, if you need prayer today, there's something, we don't want you to leave without praying with somebody over here in this area. We can designate an area, we can make it more obvious, and we can pray for people. Just pray for people after the service and find out what's going on. I want to see that more, and it doesn't just have to be one or two people. And so making that a priority also facilitates opportunities. But then also in establishing a prayer group in your workplace. You can take the work of making disciples into the going aspect of the Great Commission and connect with Christians and potentially non-Christians in your place of work. You may believe it sounds impossible where you work, and maybe it is. I don't know. I could be naive, but I've seen enough situations where that's not the case, where people would normally say, oh, you can't do that. There are a number of people at Pillar who have had experience with this and could coach you if interested. Obviously, we're not just trying to make better disciples, but more of them as well. And this can be a good context for making connections. Finding out what's possible really matters, right? And so these are all ways that this can happen. Furthermore, I'm really hopeful that we would see the start of praying before our worship services, a group of people. I can't always be there to do that. I do pray for the service. I hope you pray for it individually. But there would be something great about people just gathering up at 10 a.m. and praying for the worship service, praying over the seats, praying for the people that come, pray for what happens in the children's ministry. And if you think you would want to help make that a reality, you should just talk to us and we'll get you set up. There's nothing holding us back from doing it other than somebody who would say, I'll be there at 10, and anybody else who wants to join me and us encouraging people to do that. But I'd really love to see that happen. That's a side note. Number 5, arrive 15 minutes early for worship. Being purposeful and make connections, or stay 15 minutes after. Our Sunday gatherings offer great opportunities to connect with new people. Did you know newer people tend to come early? Well, some of you probably wouldn't know that. Yeah. If you were to consistently arrive early and get to know a few people who are coming in at that time, you'll be surprised how quickly you have a network of relationships to pursue for making disciples. After the service, you can plan to work the welcome table and meet people who are looking to connect and find ways to personally assist them in doing so. Where's Catherine? Catherine's right there. If you want to work the welcome table, connect with Catherine, and she'll get you set up for greeting and welcome and everything that's involved with that. But just hanging out by the welcome table and knowing stuff about the church is a great way to meet people and connect with them and follow up and figure out how to get them involved in the life of the church. We just want to see all of these things as the role of the church, not a staff role or not just a particular person, but all of us to be working together to multiply the effort. That's number 5. Number 6, start where you serve. Start where you serve. Serving and volunteer opportunities at Pillar will inevitably give you opportunities to get to know people you have not met. Often in the context of serving, we learn about one another and we'll become aware of ways we may encourage growth and initiate peer-to-peer discipling opportunities. So, we're not just, you may hear us a lot of times, there's a logistical practicality to getting people to volunteer for things. I get that. But that is not the motivation. Obviously, we are facilitating the whole of what's going on here through volunteers connecting into the different areas. But there's more that happens in that. That's where relationships form. That's where interactions. I sometimes hear people who serve in children's ministry say, actually, I know that set of families because I watch their kid on once a month and I got to know them that way. And, if you feel disconnected, watch a few kids, greet parents at the end of the service, figure out who they are, ask their names. The good thing is they got stickers on. You get to know who they are, and you start matching faces and families. And you work alongside other people in those ministries. On the setup team, we have 8 or 10 people who come spend a couple hours setting up in the morning. You start to get to know other people, and it creates a context for those things to form. People who volunteer and support the youth ministry, they don't wonder, who can we impact and disciple? They're wondering, how can we help all of these kids and their families grow in Christ? And so all of those are ways where serving is a doorway in to accomplish the work of making disciples. But you see how when we have it in our mind, that's what we're up to. Then when we go into all of those areas, we're going in purposeful. I'm not just thinking, oh, I got to set up chairs today. No, I want to demonstrate a posture of service, of joy. I want to serve my other brothers and sisters who are helping with setup. I want them to be encouraged. I want to find out what's going on in their lives. And so this isn't just a task. This is about relationships, and it's about the big M of ministry, of making disciples together through the context of serving with one another. So start where you serve. And then number 7, make a commitment. All right, this is where I bring it all in, sort of head bowed, eyes closed. We're going to... But it is that moment. It is that moment. Our courses, this course is the first in a series of 6. Okay, the next one's going to be in January, and we'll have accompanying tools and a similar thrust and focus in a different category. But they're designed to inform. Hopefully you feel a bit more informed after three sessions about how you can make disciples, about how you can look at what's going on in the church and utilize the things that are already there for accomplishing that task and have a little better picture of what that means. But we aren't just here to inform. We're here to catalyze these practices. We want to be a catalyst for you taking action in these particular areas. And we want to catalyze these practices because we believe it will help you develop into a multiplier rather than just think about it. And so exercising these skills are what's really going to make the difference in your life. And the Make Disciples course, is being the first in a 6-part series, we're working on to help our members grow and develop as skilled ministers and leaders in our local community. Sitting through the instructional portion of the course is only part of it. So what we've done is just part of it. And maybe you've sat through lots of courses and lots of teaching. This is a little bit different. We're really trying to build a set of teaching and experiences in the context of our body and help people move through them so we can develop people that we can further sort of count on to be responsible for these areas, to build in these areas, to grow in these areas. And we want to push you to grow. So we want you to make a commitment. We want you to commit to 3 particular things. Now, if you haven't listened, if you weren't here for all 3 sessions, by Tuesday, just give me to Tuesday, Devin. Do you think that's possible? We'll get all 3 of these videos up there. You're here today. The other 2 will definitely be up and available. So if you missed any of the past ones, we want you to sit down. The note sets will be up there in PDF form. Listen to the videos, watch the videos, go through, make sure that you've gone through all the content with us. So that's just sort of a starting point. After doing so, and today, we want you to make a commitment that you'll do 3 things to complete the course. This is not the completion of the course. The completion of the course is something that you will do in response to the information that we've talked about. 3 things. 1, we want you to work through the Grow Your Faith tool with 1 to 2 other people over the next 6 months. That could be in a one-on-one or 1 to 2, like 3 people together talking through it. We just want you to get comfortable with the tool and comfortable sitting in that kind of context, talking about spiritual things, helping one another grow. And so we want you to make a commitment to doing that sometime in the next 6 months. I'll show you the sample, tell you how I'm going to use it, and we just want you to find some people to do that. We're not even going to say, give you any rules, it's got to be somebody you don't know, or let's just say not in your nuclear family, all right? Outside, you've got to practice the skill set of connecting with somebody who isn't already forced to sit around the dinner table with you. All right, so that's a good place to use these things, but let's go beyond that. Work through that tool. The tool is self-explanatory once I show it to you. It helps give a broad vision for healthy rhythms of a Christian life. Using it will also help you get comfortable with some of the skills necessary to disciple others. We designed the tool purposely so that somebody who's a new Christian, it would give them a good basis for thinking about what do I need to be thinking about as a Christian in terms of practices. It's not exhaustive, so you're not going to find everything you wish Christians would know. It's not all going to be there, but you're going to find a great starting point. It's also designed at a spot. These are things that help renew anybody that is Christian to think about areas of their life where they need to grow and develop practices they can put into place, how they can take steps forward. So we want you to do that. Second, we want you to read The Trellis and the Vine or Discipling by Mark Dever. There's 5 of them there, and we always have that blue book on our back table right now for this season of life. We will buy the book for you. You could choose The Trellis and the Vine or Discipling by Mark Dever. Either one of those, we would be happy, but we want you to read one of them. They both help fill in the gaps. The books will help fill in some of the gaps left. We couldn't cover everything in this time, and they'll help you provide some other insight that will help you grow in your vision for discipleship in the local church. So take some time to read one of those books. And then we want you to write a 500-word reflection on what you've learned upon completing those 2 things. And you may think, well, this is just sort of like a homework assignment. No, it's not. It's about you becoming clear about what you've learned through the process. You've taken 6 months to walk somebody through, and the tool. It's only 10 sessions, so 6 months and 10 sessions isn't a long, super intense pace. But you've taken some time to do that. You've taken some time to read. You've heard input. It's important for you to just take some time. It's like a page and a half, right? To write a little bit of reflection about what you've learned through that process and how you want to continue to put it into practice. And do that and send it to us. So we want you to make that commitment. I'm asking you to consider making that commitment today. I'm not going to make you raise your hand or stand up or put you on the spot right now, although that would be kind of fun. But it probably wouldn't result in real responses. If you're willing to make that commitment to do these things, and they're all written on your page, we will provide some reminders, coaching, and accountability to help you make progress. Let us know you want to make the commitment by sending a short email to elders@pillarchurchsbc.com, and just tell us that's what you plan to do that. So that is the content that we wanted to cover in terms of making commitment. I want to walk you in our remaining time through this tool. If I can find that one that I just picked up. There it is. All right. It should be on a page that looks like this. It says Rhythm 6, Confessing. 10 different rhythms that are in there. I can't remember them all in order, but something like believing, repenting, confessing, gathering, serving, forgiving. Just kind of a broad patterns of a Christian life. Just think about patterns and rhythms. And so the idea would be that you could sit down with somebody and just work through this material, and and discover some ideas in this area, some biblical principles. There's some basic practices in there and some tips for being purposeful. So let me just do that with this one a little bit. We're going to have to do it kind of quickly. But here's how I would imagine doing that. I get together with somebody, and we know that this is what we're getting together to do. And so as we do that, we're going to kind of take turns reading parts of it. And the passages are on the document. Now you could, maybe if you want to teach the person, if they're young in their faith or just learning the Bible, you may want to actually have them turn to the specific passages in the Bible just so they get used to turning to places in their Bible and finding places. For others who maybe are already at that point, this is just an easy reference guide. It keeps it in front of you. But we've designed it to be sort of expositional. We picked larger chunks of passages, so it's not just like proof text verses pulled out of context. We got larger chunks, so we're looking at the Bible and thinking about that. So initially, you're just going to look at the summary. And one of you is going to say, read the summary. Sin is a great power in secrecy. Many people work to overcome their struggles with sin by themselves, mainly because they're too ashamed or embarrassed to speak to someone else about them. But sin thrives in secrecy. In the body of Christ, we're encouraged to confess our sins to one another for prayer and support, knowing that ultimately Christ has removed the shame and guilt. Confession leads to freedom, support, and prayer that will assist anyone who engages in it. So now, remember, this is not just top-down discipleship, this is peer-to-peer discipleship. So now we're going to read this and grow together. And so you can say, hey, why don't you, if I'm working with somebody, Nico, why don't you read this passage? Okay, and so Nico reads down through the passages that are in the gray box. And we say, okay, now from that passage, let's try to recognize these principles that are already written down and given to us. Now, let me tell you why we made the tool this way. I've used a lot of discipleship tools in the past. I've used some that give zero input. It's like a set of questions and verses, and people who are inexperienced and new to the Bible, they don't even know how to assess what they've read, and they've got to answer these questions. And if you're not used to discipling, you may not entirely know what the question was designed to ask, and you're trying to figure out what should I say about this, and it feels very, very vague. Okay? And so what we want to do is kind of create a balance of here's a passage, and here's kind of three main points that passage is making about this subject, and some questions underneath them that allow you to process that. And so when you jump down to biblical principles, you go, okay, let's try to find these together. Let's make sure we understand the principle. So now you're going to look at it. Confessing sin to one another removes the false impression that we're alone in our struggle with sin. Well, that comes out of the passage. When we look at the passage above, it's clear that sinful struggles are the reality of every Christian. Let's look up. How does the passage show us that? And you would want to sit there together and just kind of look through the passage. How does the passage put that on display? And so you're studying the Bible together with a guide, essentially. And, most of the time we're unaware of this truth because we're looking at one another's lives on the surface. And so you can talk about that a little bit, right? It's like, we perceive at church that everybody's doing okay, but then it turns out everybody's struggling with some particular area of their life. And that's the reality. Confession of sin actually helps us to see that reality and gain fellowship with one another. That's what the passage says. As we discover that we're battling temptation together, as we're battling different areas of sin, confession, that's one of the things that it does. It removes that false impression. The truth is we want to be a church where that false impression is gone, don't we? Where people come in and they realize this is a group of people that understand what it's like to be sinners saved by the grace of God. And so they're relating to one another out of that grace, out of that mercy. So, question, are there areas of life where you're particularly struggling with sin? Now notice this is rhythm 6, right? This isn't like session 1. There's a reason for that, right? Because by the time you've had a few times, now you can dig into an area like this and go, hey, listen, are there some particular areas that now different people are going to be on the transparency spectrum at different places, aren't they? But we have to actually help one another grow more honest lives. So we want to answer that question. You want to answer that question with the person, demonstrating a level of genuine transparency. Are there areas where you're struggling? What would keep you from confessing them to someone? So right now, they don't even have to tell you what it is, right? You're just at a spot where you're going, yeah, I've got some areas like that, right? And you might say, yeah, me too. What would keep you from feeling free to talk about those things? So now you're talking about, what are the hang-ups? What is it that makes us afraid? You can hear for like gospel motivations or not, or fears where there's a lack of the gospel in a question like that. So you discuss that as long as it seems reasonable. You go on to the next one. You do the same thing with the second point. Confessing sin to one another roots our identity in the gospel. When you're working on the biblical principles, every time you just want to try to find the point in the passage. There's the guide underneath is just really to help you do that. And get clear about it if it's unclear to you. So you want to go back up into the passage, hey, let's underline where we see that the case. So you're just using this, you're processing the Bible together, guiding that out loud. We want to present ourselves as spiritually successful rather than saved sinners. When we walk in the light together, it reminds us our significance is not our success spiritually, but in Christ's cleansing mercy. We're objects of Christ's mercy. He claims us as his own despite our failures. And the true story is that our sin is great, but his grace is greater. He is most glorified in us when this is clear. So confession forces us to face our false image that we prefer to display and replace it with humility and compassion for others who struggle. So now you can just process that. One of you read it, and then we just talk about it. Do you see where this is true? Have you experienced the truth of that? It comes with a question. Not all of them have a question, but many of them do. What are some of the good motivations for confession that come from the passage? So now these are things that aren't given. Now you're going to go back into the passage and look at it a little bit and see, how would this passage motivate us to this practice, this rhythm of confessing sin to one another, living honest lives together? And it says, reflect on them and write down 3 motivations for confessing sin to one another. That's an indication that if you think about the passage and dwell in it long enough, you're going to find at least 3 motivations for confessing sin. Now, you may not get them all in one session, but it gives you a chance to realize we need to meditate on this passage more. Somebody who understands the Bible saw 3 motivations in here. Let's try to find them ourselves, right? Or come up with the ways that they're there. And then the third biblical principle, confessing sin to one another, leads us to experience the cleansing power of the gospel. If you look at the passage, you see that in the passage. It's highlighted in what's said there. So those are biblical principles for confession. That's why we want. So now we've got some biblical principles. What are some basic practices? Like how do we start to move from theory to practice? Well, one of the ways that this can happen easier, we're just going to mark out those practices. I'm not going to read through them all, but establish relationships with other Christians where confession take place. So you can just kind of go back and forth, kind of looking at the point, reading it, seeing if you need to read those parts, and then answering the question together. Who do you have in your life currently that fits the description above? So the description is really about, having some people. You don't need to confess sin to everybody and always publicly and all that, but you ought to have some people in your life who you're living pretty honestly with. That there's some transparency there. And you're like, when I'm with that person, I don't try to guard it, don't try to hide it. This is what I'm struggling with. These are the things that I feel most tempted about. They know those things. They're praying for me. And so that's what confession creates. Well, the question usually before you can ever get there is, do I have any people like that in my life? So one of the practices that you need to build in your life, so what we're saying is, hey, we want to grow in maturity as Christians. If we want to grow in maturity, one of the practices we need to establish relationships with other Christians where this can take place. Okay? So, who do you have in your life that currently fits that description above? Are they present in your life or easily kept at a distance? That question's in there because my experience is people are, oh, yeah, I got that person. They're in Okinawa, Japan. And you're like, yeah, okay, that's good. Like, there's some good to that, right? To have some relationships in the past where there's honesty. But, there's something about seeing somebody on a regular basis in your life that allows you not to keep those sort of things at a distance. So the question is, do you have any people around you regularly who are doing this? And I would even add, other than your spouse. Maybe you have a good spiritual dynamic in your marriage, but there are things that make it very difficult to live this sort of transparency all the time. And there are areas where you need to connect with other people. And there are areas where you need to be built up by other people in ways that your spouse cannot help you. Okay? And so establish these kind of relationships where you can't keep people easily at a distance. Establish a pattern of transparency with other Christians. So that's just about the fact that we have to take the risk to learn transparency. When I got married, I was very, very guarded, extremely guarded. I think I've grown in transparency at this point. And it's part of just believing that it was a picture of maturity, that it was something to move towards. I was married to Annie, who wears everything on her sleeve, right? So if you know Annie well, she actually can't hide anything. And so we would go to group Bible studies together, and she would be like, yeah, like throw a bomb in the middle about whatever our recent discussion was about getting in an argument. And it may have been in the car on the way there, and I'm just sitting there like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I've learned to be okay with it. I was so terrified about what other people thought about me. What other people thought about my maturity. So I hid a lot of my life. That's true in a lot of group dynamics. It's true in a lot of relationships that you have spiritually, and maybe very true for you, that you're scared to death that if people knew where you are spiritually, you wouldn't be accepted, you wouldn't encourage you. You're worried about how they'll think about you. And the sooner you get over that, the freer you're going to be. Confession helps facilitate that. It helps you realize that I can be loved, encouraged, strengthened in ways I never imagined when my life gets honest. So we want our external life and our internal life to have a wonderful integrity to one another, where people who experience us in private and in family, and the ways that people experience us outside of those settings. So that transparency is built through confession. Communicate with church leaders about areas of your life. You may have areas of your life that you're like, I really need help in this area. We've got resources in the body to help with that, and it's just part of living honestly where you need to grow. So these are just some basic practices to think about together. And then you're left not only with those basic practices, but some ideas about how you can be purposeful. Now we're going to take confession. We've got biblical principles. We've talked about some of those basic practices. How could I do that at Pillar now? What is here to help me for that? This isn't exhaustive, but these are ideas for how you can go, okay, I know I can do that. And so we're trying to help you see that the things that we're doing are designed for assisting in this. Involve yourself in a life group or some other setting where you can establish relationships of trust. Okay? Staying on the fringe will not lead to real relationships. At Pillar, there are multiple environments where you can find people to grow with, where confession of sin is normal. Where it's normal to do that. I know in our life group, growingly, when we get together for prayer and split out, men and women, it feels very comfortable to share what's going on in our lives, to pray specifically for those things, and to follow up. If you don't have that, you need to get in a life group where that's happening. If your life group's not doing that, you need to push your life group to create that kind of space. And So the question, are you involved in any groups where transparent relationships can form? This is going to push us to think like, okay, maybe you are already and you're just not seeing the opportunities and working those out. And then make confession a structured part of meeting with other Christians rather than the exception. So here's what I mean. If you're going to start if you're doing this sort of booklet, right? What we want to do is make it a structure, like make it normal to ask a certain set of questions of one another, like we were just talking about earlier. Where those questions, we're going to dig into those areas and we're just going to talk. We're going to talk about those. We're going to make sure that we don't let all of our conversations about goings-ons in life keep us from getting to the things that we want to press into with one another. And so have it. You're struggling in a particular area, just know when we get together, we're going to ask about that area. We're going to ask one another about that area. If struggling with a particular set of responsibilities, we're going to ask about that. We're going to talk about it. How are you doing in that particular thing that we've been praying for? You feel like you've not been faithful in sharing the gospel and opportunities God's given you? Okay, well, we're going to remember. We're going to ask about evangelism every time we get together. God gave you an opportunity. What'd you do? How have you been praying for God to give you opportunities? All of these things are ways we just make it structured and normal to ask those kinds of questions, and then it facilitates honesty, confession, and prayer. So the last question then on the thing, what are some questions you could ask one another regularly for a spiritual checkup? So we've got a 10-session thing just like that. You sit down at Starbucks, meet at your house, you can have breakfast, you can do it online over lunch, you do it over FaceTime with people. There's a whole bunch of ways you can do this, but this is a tool where you can take everything that you've learned over the last 3 weeks and begin to do it with another person. Okay? And so that's what the tool is for. We'll soon be getting these into a nicely printed little deal that you can use, and we're developing additional sets of these that, you might be like, oh, we went through 11, now what do we have? Well, by then you should just figure out a way to help encourage one another, right? But this is like training wheels to get you down that line. So here's my desire. I've said it, and I'm going to say this to close. That everybody here would gain comfort at using something like that. That it would just if I had somebody as a pastor who was like they need to be connected with, I could find it wouldn't take me long to look around on a Sunday and be like, hey, can you two get together and walk through the grow your faith tool? And you'd be like, got it. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I've got the materials. I've done it before with somebody else. Easy day. And so that's the sort of environment that we want to create. And through that, I think if we begin with the way it happens in the body, my vision and desire is that you become even more comfortable then with those relationships that God may give you outside the body, where you can begin to walk somebody through what it looks like to be a Christian. And we're making a tool very similar to this for helping someone understand the gospel. So that's the desire, that's the whole thing. If you're willing to make a commitment to those 3 things and finish the course, please, just as simple, it could be a 1-line email to let us know. Put your name at the bottom in case you have one of those funny email addresses where we can't identify you. Just let us know that you're making that commitment. And we want to help coach you through seeing this happen.